Marcus Reed woke up with his head pounding like someone had hit him with a hammer. The metal floor under him was cold and rough. He tried to move, but thick chains held his arms and legs. The air smelled wrong, like burning metal mixed with something sweet that made his stomach turn. He looked around and saw he was in a small metal room with no windows. The walls were covered in strange symbols that glowed with a blue light. Everything looked alien and wrong. Marcus remembered working on his salvage ship near the edge of human space when bright lights had surrounded him. Then everything went black. The door opened with a hiss and something walked in that made Marcus freeze with fear. It looked like a giant insect walking on two legs. Its body was covered in black armor that seemed to grow from its skin. Four arms moved as it walked, and its head had large red eyes that never blinked. Behind it came two more creatures just like it. The first one spoke in a voice that sounded like metal scraping against stone. Marcus could not understand the words, but somehow they appeared in his head in English. The creature was using some kind of translator. "So this is a human," it said while looking at Marcus like he was a bug. "Very weak, very soft, no armor, no claws, no real strength. How did such pathetic creatures ever leave their home planet?" The creature walked closer and Marcus could smell something like acid coming from it. "I am Commander Vorth of the Calfani Empire. You are now property of the Empire. You will work in our mines until you die." Marcus tried to speak, but his throat was dry. Finally he managed to say, "What do you want from me?" Commander Vorth made a sound that might have been laughter. "Humans are good for only one thing. You can crawl into small spaces where our workers cannot go. You can handle the explosive materials that are too dangerous for valuable species. When you die, we will get another human to replace you." The other two creatures grabbed Marcus and dragged him from the room. His chains scraped against the metal floor as they pulled him through long hallways. The ship was huge and everything was built for creatures much larger than humans. The ceilings were high and the doors were wide. Strange lights blinked on the walls and Marcus could hear the hum of powerful engines. They brought him to another room filled with other prisoners. Marcus saw creatures he had never imagined before. Some looked like large snakes with arms. Others were made of what looked like living rock. A few seemed to be covered in wet skin like fish. All of them looked tired and scared. An older human man came over to help Marcus sit down. The man was thin and his clothes were torn and dirty. His eyes looked empty like he had seen too much pain. "My name is Tom," the man said in a quiet voice. "How long have you been out there in space?" "I was salvaging near the border zones," Marcus answered. "My name is Marcus." "How long have you been here?" Tom looked away. 2 years, maybe 3. Time does not mean much here. They work us until we break. Then they throw us away and get new prisoners." Marcus looked around the room and counted about 30 prisoners from different species. They all had the same empty look in their eyes. Fear and hopelessness filled the air like a thick fog. A loud sound came from speakers in the walls and all the prisoners stood up quickly. Tom grabbed Marcus and pulled him to his feet. "Work time," Tom said. "Do exactly what they say or they will hurt you." The Calfani guards came into the room carrying weapons that looked like they could burn holes through metal. They pointed at different groups of prisoners and spoke in their scraping voices. The translator in Marcus's head told him they were giving work assignments. "Humans to Tunnel 7, one guard said. "Explosives duty." Tom's face went white. "That is the worst job," he whispered to Marcus. "The tunnels are not stable. The explosives kill more workers than accidents do." They were taken to a large elevator that went down for what felt like hours. When it stopped, Marcus could feel the weight of tons of rock above his head. The air was hot and full of dust that made breathing hard. The tunnel was narrow and dark. Strange crystals in the walls gave off a weak light that made everything look green. Marcus and 3 other humans were given bags of explosive charges and told to place them deep in the tunnel, where the Calfani could not fit. "The crystals are very valuable," a guard explained. "They power our ships and weapons. You will crawl to the end of the tunnel and place the charges exactly where we tell you." If you place them wrong, the explosion will kill you. If you refuse to work, we will kill you anyway. Marcus took the bag of explosives and started crawling into the tunnel. The space was so small he had to pull himself forward on his stomach. Sharp rocks cut his clothes and skin. The air got hotter the deeper he went. As he crawled, Marcus started thinking. The Kalthani thought humans were weak and stupid. They did not watch the prisoners carefully because they believed no one could escape. But Marcus had been an engineer before he became a salvage worker. He understood machines and systems. He placed the explosive charges where the guards told him, but he also looked carefully at everything around him. The tunnel walls had metal supports that looked old. Cables and pipes ran along the ceiling carrying power and air to other parts of the mine. Everything was connected. When Marcus crawled back out, he saw that the other prisoners were doing their jobs without thinking. They had given up hope. But Marcus was just starting to plan. That night in the prisoner room, Marcus lay on the hard floor and thought about what he had seen. The Kalthani were powerful, but they depended on their machines. They believed they were superior to all other species. That belief might be their weakness. Marcus closed his eyes and started to remember everything he had learned about engineering and computers. Somewhere in this giant mine, there had to be a central control system. If he could find it and figure out how it worked, maybe he could turn the Kalthani's own technology against them. For the first time since waking up in chains, Marcus smiled. The Kalthani thought they had captured just another weak human. They had no idea what they had really brought into their mine. 2 months had passed since Marcus first crawled into the dark tunnels of the mining station. Every day was the same nightmare of heat, dust, and explosives. But while his body worked in the tunnels, his mind was busy learning everything about his prison. The Kalthani guards treated him like a piece of equipment. They would point and grunt orders, never thinking that the human might be listening and understanding more than they realized. Marcus learned their routines, their shift changes, and their weaknesses. Sub-Commander Cleth was the worst of all the guards. He was smaller than the other Kalthani, but twice as cruel. He seemed to enjoy making the prisoners suffer. Cleth would make humans carry heavier loads or work longer hours just to watch them struggle. "Look at the soft human," Cleth would say to the other guards. "No armor, no strength, no purpose except to die for the Empire? Even the lowest Kalthani worker is worth 1,000 of these creatures." Marcus learned to keep his face empty when Cleth spoke. He would nod and look down like a broken prisoner. But inside he was studying everything. He watched how the guards operated their weapons and equipment. He memorized the layout of the tunnels and the main corridors the other prisoners had given. "Up hope long ago?" Tom barely spoke anymore except to warn Marcus about dangers. Lisa, another human who had been captured 6 months earlier, spent most of her time staring at the walls. David, the youngest human prisoner, cried quietly when he thought no one was watching, but Marcus also met prisoners from other species who still had some fight left in them. There was Hiss, a snake-like Sathi who worked in the acid pools that dissolved the valuable crystals from raw ore. Hiss was smart and still angry about being captured. "The Kalthani think they know everything," Hiss told Marcus during a brief rest period. "But their armor cannot protect them from our acid. One splash in the right place and even a commander would melt." Marcus also became friends with Petra, one of the rock-like granite folk. Petra had been an engineer on her homeworld before being captured. She knew how the mining equipment worked and which parts were most important. "The whole station depends on the main power core," Petra explained in her slow, rumbling voice. "If something happened to the power distribution system, all the security systems would fail, the elevators would stop working. Even the air recycling would shut down." The most helpful prisoner was Ripple, one of the fish-like Quellan. Ripple could move through the flooded lower levels of the station where other species could not go. She had explored parts of the mine that the guards never visited. "There are old maintenance tunnels down there," Ripple told Marcus. "The water is too deep for Kalthani, so they never check them. Some of the tunnels connect to the main computer systems." Marcus listened to everything and slowly began to understand how the station worked. The Calthani had built their prison like a machine. Every species had a specific job based on their abilities. They never expected prisoners to work together or share information. The guards became careless around Marcus. They would talk about station operations while he worked nearby. They discussed guard rotations and security procedures. They complained about equipment problems and system failures. Marcus remembered every word. During his work shifts, Marcus began to test small things. He would touch control panels when guards were not looking. He would examine the cables and pipes that carried power and data throughout the station. He learned that many of the systems used standard connection types that were common throughout the galaxy. Marcus had been a systems engineer before becoming a salvage operator. He understood that most advanced civilizations use similar basic principles for their computers and networks. The interfaces might look different, but the underlying logic was usually the same. One day, while working in a deep tunnel, Marcus found something interesting. Behind a loose panel in the wall, there were thick cables that glowed with data flowing through them. The cables were connected to junction boxes that had access ports. Marcus realized these were maintenance connections for the station's computer. Network. He started carrying small tools hidden in his clothes. Nothing that would be noticed during the quick searches the guards did each day. A thin piece of metal here, a small wire there. Components from broken equipment that no one would miss. Sub-Commander Cleth grew suspicious of Marcus after a few weeks. Unlike the other human prisoners who had become broken and hopeless, Marcus still seemed alert and aware. "This human is different," Cleth told the other guards. "He does not cry or beg like the others. He watches everything. Maybe we should give him harder work to break his spirit." Cleth started assigning Marcus to the most dangerous jobs. Unstable tunnels where cave-ins happened regularly. Areas with poisonous gas that burned the lungs. Places where the explosive crystals were so unstable that the slightest mistake meant death. But every dangerous assignment gave Marcus new opportunities to explore and learn. He saw parts of the station that other prisoners never visited. He found more access points to the computer systems. He discovered emergency systems and backup controls that the guards had forgotten about. The other alien prisoners began to notice that Marcus was different from the previous humans they had known. He did not give up or become hopeless. He asked questions about their work and their knowledge of the station. He seemed to be planning something. "The human is not like the others," His told Petra during one of their brief meetings. "He thinks in plans. Maybe he can do something to help us all." Marcus knew he had to be careful. If the guards suspected he was planning an escape, they would either kill him or put him in solitary confinement. He needed to appear broken while secretly preparing for something much bigger than just an escape. At night, lying on the hard floor of the prisoner quarters, Marcus would go over everything he had learned. The station's computer systems, the guard rotations, the location of important equipment, the abilities of different prisoner species, and the arrogance of the Calthani that made them careless. He was not just planning to escape anymore. Marcus was planning to destroy the entire operation and free every prisoner on the station. The Calthani thought they had captured a weak human who would work until he died. They had no idea they had brought their own destruction into their most secure facility. 4 months had passed when everything changed for Marcus. He was working in Sector 7, placing explosive charges in a new tunnel, when he heard a terrible sound from somewhere below. The ground shook and dust fell from the ceiling. Then came the screaming. Marcus and the other workers were ordered to help with the emergency. When they reached the site of the accident, Marcus saw something that filled him with cold rage. A support beam had collapsed in one of the main tunnels, trapping 5 prisoners underneath. 3 were already dead, crushed by tons of rock. 2 others were badly injured but still alive. The Calthani guards looked at the trapped prisoners for only a moment before Sub-Commander Cleth gave his order. "Too much trouble to dig them out," Cleth said in his scraping voice. "Seal the tunnel. We will mark them as mining casualties." "But they are still alive," one of the younger guards said. "We could save them if we move the rocks." Cleth turned his red eyes toward the younger guard. These creatures are tools, nothing more. When a tool breaks, you throw it away and get a new one. Sealing the tunnel will prevent the collapse from spreading. That is more important than saving two worthless prisoners. Marcus watched as the guards set up the sealing charges. The trapped prisoners were crying for help in languages Marcus did not understand, but their fear and pain needed no translation. The guards placed the explosives and everyone was ordered back. When the charges went off, the tunnel entrance disappeared behind tons of rock and metal. The cries for help stopped forever. That night, Marcus could not sleep. The image of those prisoners being buried alive stayed in his mind. He realized that escape was not enough anymore. The Calfani were not just cruel masters, they were monsters who saw all other life as worthless. This entire operation had to be stopped. The next day, Marcus was assigned to maintenance work in a section of the station he had never seen before. The corridors here were cleaner and the lights were brighter. He was told to repair some damaged panels in what the guards called the information center. When Marcus entered the room, his heart began to beat faster. He was looking at the central computer core of the entire mining station. Rows of processing units lined the walls, their lights blinking as data flowed through them. Control stations with dozens of screens showed information about every part of the station's operations. The Calfani technician working in the room barely looked at Marcus. Like all the guards, he saw humans as too primitive to understand advanced technology. Marcus was told to replace some damaged panels and clean the ventilation systems. Work that would take him hours and give him access to everything. As Marcus worked, he studied the computer systems carefully. The Calfani had built their network using principles that were similar to human technology, but much more advanced. However, the basic connection protocols were standard throughout the galaxy. Marcus began to understand how he could access the system. While cleaning around one of the control stations, Marcus saw information that made his blood run cold. The screen showed a list of mining stations throughout Calfani space. There were dozens of them, each holding thousands of prisoners from hundreds of different species. This was not just one cruel prison, it was a massive system of slavery that stretched across half the galaxy. Marcus read more of the information. When the technician was not looking, the mining operations were funding something called Expansion. Project 7. The Calfani Empire was planning to invade and conquer huge areas of space that were currently controlled by other species. Human space was one of their primary targets. The files showed detailed plans for biological weapons, designed to work against specific species. The prisoners were not just workers, they were test subjects. The Calfani were studying how different species reacted to various toxins and diseases. They'd planned to use this information to create weapons that could kill entire populations while leaving their technology intact for capture. Marcus found information about the weapons testing that had been done on previous prisoners. Thousands had died in horrible experiments. The reports were written in the same cold language the guards used, treating the death of thinking beings like the failure of machines. When Marcus read about the plans for attacking human colonies, his hands began to shake with anger. The Calfani planned to test their biological weapons on small human settlements first. Entire families would die in agony while the Empire studied how effective their poisons were. Marcus forced himself to stay calm and continue working. The technician had to believe he was just a stupid human cleaning the equipment, but Marcus was memorizing everything he saw. Computer access codes, system layouts, security protocols, and most importantly, how to send messages to other parts of the galaxy. During his lunch break, Marcus found Hiss in the acid pools and shared what he had learned. The Sathi listened with growing anger as Marcus described the testing programs and expansion plans. "My people were among the first species they captured," Hiss said, her snake-like body coiling with rage. "Entire worlds were stripped of their populations. Now I know why they needed so many of us." Marcus also told Petra about the computer systems he had found. The Granite Folk engineer understood immediately why this information was important. "If you can access their central computer, you can control everything," Petra said. "Life support, security systems, communications, even the mining equipment. The Kalthani have made their station completely dependent on automated systems. That evening, Marcus shared his discoveries with Ripple and some of the other prisoners who still had hope. He explained that they were not just fighting for their own freedom anymore. They were fighting to prevent the genocide of billions of beings throughout the galaxy. The Kalthani think they are superior to everyone else, Marcus said quietly so. The guards could not hear. They believe no primitive species could ever threaten their advanced technology. That arrogance is going to destroy them. Marcus began making more detailed plans. He needed to build simple tools that could interface with the Kalthani computer systems. He needed to coordinate with prisoners from different species who could help with different parts of the operation. Most importantly, he needed to find a way to send a warning message to human space before the invasion began. The components he needed were scattered throughout the station. A piece of metal here, some wire there, small electronic parts from broken equipment. Marcus collected everything slowly and carefully, hiding the parts in different locations, where the guards would never look. He also began to map out the exact timing of guard shifts and system maintenance schedules. There would be only a small window of opportunity when he could access the central computer without being caught. Everything would have to work perfectly or they would all die. As Marcus lay on the cold floor that night, he thought about the families on human worlds who had no idea what was coming. Children playing in their homes while the Kalthani prepared weapons that would kill them all. The responsibility felt heavier than all the rocks he had moved in the mines, but Marcus also felt something else growing inside him. A cold, hard determination that he had never experienced before. The Kalthani had made a mistake when they buried those prisoners alive in front of him. They had shown him exactly what they were and what they deserved. Now Marcus was going to show them what a human could do when the chains finally broke. 6 months had passed since Marcus first woke up in chains. He had spent weeks carefully building his tools and preparing his plan. Everything was ready. He just needed the right moment to begin. That moment came in the worst possible way. Marcus was working in the deep tunnels when he heard shouting from the main corridor. He climbed out to see what was happening and found Sub-Commander Cleth standing over Tom. The older human was on his knees, his hands shaking as blood ran down his face. "This worthless creature has been moving too slowly," Cleth announced to the gathered prisoners and guards. "His productivity has dropped below acceptable levels. He is no longer useful to the Empire." Marcus stepped forward before he could stop himself. "He is just tired. Give him some rest and he will work better." Cleth turned his red eyes toward Marcus with interest. "The human wants to bargain for another human. How touching. But this creature has already cost the Empire too much food and air. It is time to dispose of it properly." Cleth drew his weapon and pointed it at Tom's head. The older man looked up at Marcus with eyes that held no fear, only sadness. Tom had given up hope long ago. He was almost grateful that his suffering was finally going to end. "Please," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I will do his work and mine. You do not need to kill him. You will do both jobs anyway." Cleth replied, "And when you become too weak to be useful, we will kill you too. That is how the system works." The weapon fired with a bright flash. Tom's body fell to the metal floor and did not move. The other prisoners looked away in fear and horror. The guards watched with empty expressions, already forgetting about the dead human. Marcus stared at Tom's body and felt something break inside his chest. All the careful planning and patience disappeared. All the quiet acceptance and hidden rage exploded into pure fury. The time for waiting was over. That night, Marcus lay on the floor pretending to sleep while planning his revenge. The guards thought they had just removed a useless prisoner. They had no idea they had just signed their own death warrants. The next morning, Marcus was assigned to maintenance work in the computer center again. The Kalthani technician was busy with other tasks and paid no attention to the human cleaning around the equipment. Marcus pulled out the small device he had built from stolen components and connected it to one of the data ports. His device was crude compared to Kalthani technology, but it did not need to be sophisticated. It just needed to give him access to the computer network. Marcus had studied the system for months and knew exactly which commands to enter. First, he accessed the life support controls for the guard quarters. Marcus programmed the system to slowly reduce the oxygen levels during the night shift. The guards would become sleepy and careless. Some might even pass out at their posts. Next, Marcus found the security door controls. He created a special program that would activate during the shift change. All the doors in the guard sections would lock automatically. The guards would be trapped in their own quarters, while the prisoners moved freely through the rest of the station. Marcus also accessed the communication system and began uploading a message that would be broadcast to human space. The message contained everything he had learned about the Calthani plans, their mining operations, and their biological weapons program. Even if his plan failed, humanity would be warned about what was coming. While his programs uploaded, Marcus sent messages to the other prisoners through the station's internal communication system. He told Hiss to prepare the acid tanks for combat. He instructed Petra to identify which support structures to damage for maximum effect. He asked Ripple to flood the lower levels and disable the backup power systems, the Calthani technician noticed. Marcus was taking longer than usual with his cleaning work. "Human, finish your task and return to the mining sections," the technician ordered. "Almost done," Marcus replied, while his fingers continued entering commands into the computer system. He activated the final part of his plan. In exactly 6 hours, all the programs would execute at the same time. The station would become a death trap for the guards and a weapon for the prisoners. Marcus returned to the mining tunnels and began spreading the word to prisoners who had not received his electronic messages. He told them to be ready for the signal. When the lights went out, the rebellion would begin. Sub-Commander Cleth noticed that Marcus seemed different. The human was no longer acting defeated and hopeless. There was something dangerous in his eyes that made even the cruel Calthani feel uncomfortable. "Watch that human carefully," Cleth told his guards. "I think it is planning something. Maybe we should kill it now before it causes trouble." But before Cleth could act, the station's lights flickered and went out. Emergency lighting activated, casting everything in a red glow that made the corridors look like passages through hell. Alarms began sounding throughout the station as Marcus's programs took control of the computer systems. In the guard quarters, Calthani soldiers found their doors locked and their communication systems dead. The ones who had been sleeping were still unconscious from the reduced oxygen. The others were trapped and confused, unable to understand how their advanced technology had turned against them. Marcus walked calmly through the mining sections, no longer pretending to be a broken prisoner. Other prisoners looked at him with amazement and growing hope. The quiet human had somehow taken control of the entire station. "Now we fight," Marcus announced to the gathered prisoners. "Not just for our freedom, but for every being the Calthani have tortured and killed. Tonight we show them what happens when the chains break." Hiss released the acid from the processing tanks, sending streams of the deadly chemical flowing through the corridors toward the guard positions. The acid ate through metal doors and walls like they were made of paper. Any Calthani caught in the flow died screaming as their armor dissolved. Petra used her knowledge of the station's structure to destroy key support beams. Entire sections of the facility began to collapse, crushing the guards who had tormented prisoners for years. The sound of breaking metal and falling rock echoed through the tunnels. Ripple flooded the lower levels, forcing the remaining guards toward the upper sections where other prisoners were waiting with improvised weapons. The Calthani found themselves being hunted through their own station by the creatures they had considered worthless. Marcus made his way toward the command center where he knew Commander Vorth would be trying to regain control of the station. It was time for the final confrontation. The human prisoner was coming to collect payment for 6 months of suffering, and the murder of his friend Tom. The screaming had begun, just as the title promised. But it was not the prisoners who were screaming anymore. Marcus walked through the burning corridors of the mining station toward the command center. Behind him, the rebellion he had started was destroying everything the Calthani had built. Prisoners who had been broken and hopeless were now fighting. With the fury of beings who had nothing left to lose, The station's computer systems obeyed Marcus's commands instead of their original masters. Doors opened for him while staying locked against the guards. Life support flowed normally in the prisoner sections while failing in the areas where Calthani soldiers were trapped. The advanced technology that had made the Empire so powerful was now being used to destroy them. Marcus reached the command center and found the door sealed shut. He connected his device to the control panel and overrode the security systems. The massive door slid open with a hiss, revealing Commander Vorth. Standing alone in the center of the room, the Calthani commander had removed his ceremonial armor and was holding a weapon designed for close combat. His forearms moved in patterns that showed he was trained for battle. His red eyes burned with hatred as he looked at the human who had destroyed his station. "You think you have won?" Vorth said in his scraping voice. "But you are still just a weak human. I will kill you with my own hands and then restore order to this facility." Marcus stepped into the room and the door sealed behind him. He was holding a piece of broken metal that he had sharpened into a crude blade. Against the Calthani's natural armor and superior strength, it seemed like a pathetic weapon. "I'm not trying to win," Marcus said quietly. "I'm trying to make you pay for what you did to Tom and all the others." Vorth attacked with the speed that made Calthani warriors feared throughout the galaxy. His forearms moved like a whirlwind, striking from multiple directions at once. Marcus barely managed to dodge the first attack. Feeling the wind from the commander's claws as they passed inches from his face, the human was smaller and slower than his opponent, but 6 months in, the mines had taught him things that could not be learned in any training program. He had learned to move through spaces that seemed impossible. He had learned to work with broken tools and damaged equipment. Most importantly, he had learned to endure pain that would break most beings. Marcus used the command center's equipment against his opponent. He threw computer components to distract Vorth, then struck at the joints where the Calthani's natural armor was weakest. When Vorth's weapon came too close, Marcus rolled under control consoles and struck from unexpected angles. The battle was brutal and desperate. Vorth's claws left deep cuts in Marcus's arms and chest. The commander's strength was overwhelming when he managed to grab the human. But Marcus fought with the memory of every prisoner who had died in this place. He fought for Tom and Lisa and David and all the others who had been murdered by Calthani cruelty. Slowly, Marcus began to understand his opponent's fighting patterns. Vorth was trained for formal combat against other warriors. He was not prepared to fight someone who used the environment as a weapon and struck from positions that seemed impossible. Marcus grabbed a handful of the acid that was flowing through the damaged walls and threw it at Vorth's face. The commander screamed as the chemical burned through his natural armor. Marcus used the distraction to strike with his makeshift blade, finding the weak points in Vorth's body that he had learned about during months of observation. The fight ended when Marcus managed to get behind the wounded commander and strike at the nerve cluster that controlled Vorth's lower body. The Calthani fell to the floor. Paralyzed but still alive, Marcus stood over his defeated enemy, breathing hard and bleeding from many wounds. "This is for Tom," he said, and finished what the rebellion had started, the command center's communication. Systems were still functioning, and Marcus could hear reports from throughout the station. The prisoners had taken control of every section. The surviving guards were either dead or trapped in areas that were flooding with acid or water. Marcus activated the station's emergency broadcast system and sent his message toward human space. The transmission contained detailed information about Calthani military capabilities, their expansion plans, and the locations of other mining stations throughout their empire. Even if no humans from this station survived, the warning would reach Earth and the colonies, but Marcus had no intention of dying here. He accessed the evacuation systems and found that several escape pods were still functional. He opened the communication channels to all sections of the station and spoke to the prisoners who had followed him into rebellion. "The station is lost," Marcus announced. "Everyone get to the escape pods. We are going home." Throughout the facility, prisoners began moving toward the escape pod bays. Marcus had programmed the systems to give priority to the former captives. The pods would carry them to neutral space where they could find rescue ships or make contact with their home governments. As the evacuation began, Marcus made one final decision. The station's nuclear reactor could be overloaded to create an explosion that would destroy everything. No evidence of the biological weapons research would survive. No Calthani reinforcements would be able to use the facility as a base for future operations. Marcus set the overload sequence and then made his way to the last escape pod. As he strapped himself into the pilot seat, he could see other pods launching from the station. Hiss was piloting one pod filled with Sathi survivors. Petra had another pod carrying Granite Folk prisoners. Ripple was leading a group of Quellan toward safety. The station exploded behind them as the escape pods fled into deep space. The facility that had caused so much suffering became a brief star in the darkness, then faded to nothing. Marcus looked back once at the expanding cloud of debris, then set course for human space. The message that Marcus had sent reached Earth 3 days before the first Calthani invasion fleet was scheduled to depart. Human military forces were waiting. When the alien ships arrived at the edge of human space, the surprise attack became a slaughter as human weapons tore through the unprepared. Calthani vessels, other species throughout the galaxy, received similar warnings and began attacking the mining stations in their regions. The Calthani Empire's expansion plans collapsed as their secret operations were exposed and destroyed. 6 months later, Marcus stood before the Galactic Council on the neutral station at Alpha Centauri. He was no longer a prisoner or a salvage worker. He had become humanity's representative in the growing alliance against the Calthani Empire. The Calthani believed that humans were weak because we lacked their natural armor and enhanced strength, Marcus said to the assembled delegates. They were wrong. Our strength comes from something they never understood. We adapt, we endure. And when we are pushed too far, we become something that even their advanced technology cannot stop. The council voted unanimously to support military action against the remaining Calthani facilities. The empire that had enslaved millions of beings across the galaxy was finally facing justice. Marcus returned to his quarters after the meeting and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, other beings were still suffering in Calthani prison stations, but now they had hope. The chains had been broken, the screams had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. The quiet human who had been captured 6 months ago was gone forever. In his place stood someone who had learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes from refusing to give up, even when everything seems hopeless. The Calthani had tried to break his spirit, but instead they had forged it into something unbreakable. The awakening had begun, and humanity was ready to take its place among the stars.